Righto, you lot. I'm here to answer a question today. Today, I'm speaking American again. I have a habit, don't I? I think I've started it. I think I watched too many of you American videos, and I've started sitting here going, today I'm gonna do this. Oh, piss off. Anyway, no, honestly, I've got all this set up and I've been playing around with this, and I had a question popped up on my comments of one of my other videos. But John Bolt, could you make a video on how many things, CBs, burners, etc. that you can wire up to a power pack? Thanks. I always thought that for every CB you have, you need more power supplies, but wasn't sure. Now, John, and for anybody else who this may concern, the answer, well, a power pack, for those of you that are wondering what the hell is a power pack, people for some reason call power supplies, or PSUs, power supply unit, they call them power packs, alright? It's like a slang that some people use for it, and I got confused to start with. I was like, what the bloody hell, people, you don't use a power pack, you use a PSU or a power supply. But it turns out to be the same thing, and people have been using that term for a long time. So anyone that's confused about what is a power pack, it's a power supply, a PSU. So the answer is as many as you want. As many as you want. You could hook up, if the PSU had the right amount of amperage, you could put on 100 radios to the same one and it would power them absolutely fine. Now let me explain a bit more. So, to work out how many radios, we'll start with radios and then we'll move on to burners. To work out how many radios you can attach to one power supply, you need to have a rough idea of how many amps said radio is going to draw. Now, just as a rough example, and this can be applied to most 4 watt CB radios, on transmit it will draw around about 1.5 amps. It is around about, but that is the rule of thumb, the sort of, ballpark figure, 1.5 amps on transmit, and on receive it's something like 0.4 amp. It's a very minuscule amount of amperage on receive, but on transmit about 1.5 amps roughly. So now you've got a rough idea. If you've got a 4 watt CB radio that transmits on 4 watts, you need at least 1.5 amp power supply. Now let's be honest, most power supplies are more than 1.5 amps. So these are the most basic power supplies really for CB radios. Okay, so we got this one here. This was my first ever power supply for a CB radio, and it doesn't say on it solid state relay DC 240 volt 50 hertz power supply 70 VA, but it doesn't say on it. Manufactured to relevant specifications, British standards, but it doesn't say anywhere on it what amps it is. Now I can tell you that this one is about 3 amp power supply, so it will supply a maximum of 3 amps roughly. Now that means that you can run your radio on it, 2 CBs at a maximum, but you're not going to be transmitting 2 CBs at the same time, are you? So you could run 2 CBs on it, or even 3, and have 2 receiving and 1 transmitting if you wanted on this. You couldn't run a burner on this. And this one's a little bit more beefier and probably the same age. This one says it's 5 to 7 amp. Now this means that it's 5 amps but 7 amp maximum draw. I don't know what the duty cycle is on this one, but I can tell you for a fact that if you run it at 7 amps it won't last very long at all. But it's a bit more beefier, so you could run a few more radios, maybe do the maths. You probably put 5 or 6, 7, 8 radios on it, 9 radios on receive perhaps, more than that, because they're about less than half an amp on receive. You could run a lot of radios on this one, but you could only transmit with a couple or 3 at the same time. But you won't be transmitting, will you, with 3 radios? You'll be transmitting on one, and you might have a shack with a bench where you've got loads of them just switched on because you like them being switched on. You could run them all on this power supply, no problem at all whatsoever. But you couldn't run a radio and a burner. It's important to remember that power supplies, they don't have a particularly high duty cycle. So this means that you don't want to be running them near their full potential. Okay, you want to maybe 80%, 70, 80% at the maximum, because it'll kill them. I use this analogy a lot, but imagine you went out and you bought a motor car. The motor car was advertised as a maximum speed, it'll do 100 mile an hour. That's just telling you that it can do 100 mile an hour. It's not telling you it can do 100 mile an hour all day long. It's probably best suited to be doing about 60, 70 mile an hour for long periods. It gives it a bit of leeway. If you was to do 100 mile an hour all day, the engine would blow up. As simple as that. It's the same thing with power supplies, and radios for that matter. Now, when you're talking about either bigger radios, which can transmit more power, for example, something like a 6900 or a DX5000, which will do, look, there's different models and there's an argument everywhere about how much power they truly do. This particular one does 50 watts FM and around about the same sideband. But anyway, that is that. When you get into bigger radios like this, or bigger ham radios, which will transmit more power, and also burners, which obviously take a lot of amps to run, you need a bigger power supply, which means because you're going to be putting your radio on the same power supply as well as your burner, it's going to be drawing a lot more amps. Now this particular one, this one is supposed to do 300 and something watt sideband and 150 or whatever FM. We know this one's not working to its full potential for reasons explained in previous videos. However, we'll assume that it is working full potential. This takes about 20 amps on setting 5. You put 5 watts in, or 4 and a bit, and it's on setting 5. It'll take 20 amps. Okay, so that's obviously not going to be run by them small power supplies. So you've got to go and get yourself a bigger power supply. This one, what I have here, is a 60 amp power supply, even though it says a 50 there, but it's got 60 on the gauge, and it does go to 60. I have tested it. It's a switch mode power supply, and it does work all right. They're a bit frowned upon in some places. They're a bit frowned upon in some places, but it's all right. Now this one is more than capable of running multiple radios and multiple burners. I mean, I had a burner on it which took the whole 60 amps, including the radio obviously, and the radio was driving the burner with 20 watts, and the amp was doing God knows what power, but it took the whole 60. It wouldn't want to run it for a long period of time on that because it would kill the power supply, but it will do it. So you need to think, when you're thinking about what power supply do you need to buy, you need to think, what do you intend on running with it? I would always recommend going a lot bigger than what you have at the moment, because I can guarantee you further down the line you're going to be getting more equipment and you're going to want more amps, and you're just going to have to go and buy another power supply. But if you've got one already, you don't need to buy another one. This is why I have a 60 amp one, or a 50, wherever you want to argue. That's why I have this, because this is more than capable of running anything that I want to run in my shack. I'm not going to have anything that's going to take more than 60 amps. That's a fact, I just ain't rich enough to buy that massive equipment. So if at the moment you've got a small little burner that does, let's just say you've got a KO203 burner, that's going to take, I'm not entirely 100% sure, but let's just say that'll do about 60-70 watts FM with a 4 watt drive. That's going to be 6-7 amps, maybe 8 amps, somewhere around that region, plus your 1.5 amp from your 4 watt radio. You're going to want a power supply that's more than 10 amps. You're going to go and get yourself a 20 amp power supply, or a 30 amp, even better. 30 amp power supply. And then in that way you've got the room in the future if you want to go and then buy a bigger burner, or just maybe you buy yourself a ham radio. You know, it's got 100 watt power, and you go and get a license, and then you can run 50 watts if you get the intermediate, or even 10 if you get a thingy. Or you might even go the whole way and you can run the full 100 watts, and you've still got a power supply which is capable of running the radio and other things as well. That's what I say. So you just got to work it out. You know, when you think what power supply should I get, work out how many amps each thing draws and go from there. But I'd definitely just recommend, recommend getting yourself just go and get yourself one of these. They're like 100 odd quid, you know, and you'll have it for years. It'll be all right. As long as you don't rag it, it'll be all right, and you'll be well away. You'll be absolutely fine with getting yourself a bigger power supply. But hopefully, to answer that question, how many radios can you attach to one power supply? There is no limit whatsoever, as long as you've got the capability to connect them. Which is why I bought this, and then I made up a little rig here so I can attach many things. That only has one cable, wherever it is, which comes out and goes down to that power supply, and I can attach many things to this. This has got a limit of 20 amps though, which is so it limits this. It's only capable of 20 amps, but I'm not going to be running anything on this bench which will exceed 20 amps. I mean, this takes 20 amps, and I know that's obviously, or this is actually attached directly to the power supply, so that's not counted in it. I know this takes 20 amps, which is on the limit of this little connector block thing, junction box thing, but that's all right. You know, it is what it is, and it'll take more than 20 amps anyway. So yeah, man, as long as you've got the means to connect everything to the power supply, you can run as many radios and as many burners as you want, as long as the power supply is capable of accepting those. And just don't run them to their full potential. I've already explained this, but I'll say it again, because you'll only end up killing your power supply. And with the solid state ones, when they go bang. The switch mode ones, I've never blown one up, so I don't know. I imagine they just fry and sizzle, and then that's that. But yeah, man, just don't do it. It ain't worth it. I've been there myself. Your power supply will start to buzz. It won't be able to do the amount of amps. Your radio will start buzzing. People say you got a buzz, because you're stressing your PSU. And it will just cause all kinds of problems. Make sure you've got enough gap, headroom, whatever you want to call it. If your power supply is capable of 7 amps, run it at 4. Don't go over 4 amps. Simple as that. Alright, you lot. I hope, John, that's answered your question if you're watching this, bud. If I've confused you or anything, then just put it in. I hope I haven't, but I hope I've explained it. Just as long as your power supply is capable, attach as many radios and as many burners as you want, and I'll see you later.